A few announcements. We'll do roll call, and then a request for a minute consideration for approval, and then I'll hand it over to the co-chairs for opening remarks. So a few pieces of board business before we get rolling. Nick, can you go to the next slide, please? So this looks a lot more complicated than hopefully it is. So we are trying for the first time a new framework that the board adopted in January, which is 3 subcommittees were created. And the intent of today's meeting really is to hear from each of those subcommittees about the work that they've done over the last 2 months since January. And we've highlighted some of those top high-level areas that they reviewed that are here in the agenda that we will talk about. And then each subcommittee identified some stakeholders that they want to engage with about those same topics and hear about their perspectives, any lived experience in those areas, and any recommendations they might have to the board about how DCYF is performing in those areas. And that work will then be followed up on in future subcommittee meetings and may be considered for some action that the board might take in their final report. So we can see in this agenda here, it's kind of broken out into those 3 main subcommittee areas. So we'll hear from the Youth and Young Adults Outcomes and Transition Subcommittee, and then we'll have some targeted stakeholder engagement, followed by a public comment period. We are featuring 3 public comment periods this meeting, which has been a request by board meeting members in the past to make sure that there's plenty of opportunity for the public to speak to the board. And then we'll hear from the Child Safety and Family Wellbeing Subcommittee, and at the end from the Early Childhood Development and Outcomes Subcommittee. And that subcommittee, I just want to note, based on the plethora of work that subcommittee is looking at, there wasn't a decision not to do stakeholder engagement for this meeting, but we will be prioritizing that for future meetings as we work through some of that content more. So with that, as far as the board goes, just a few quick announcements. Most board members know, but also for the stakeholders, we were looking into with the subcommittee structure whether or not we could do some public engagement in a non-public platform. But as subcommittees are subgroups of the overall board, which is subject to the Open Public Meetings Act, we are going to make sure that all subcommittee meetings as well as board meetings are open to the public. So that means for all our future subcommittee meetings, we will have that information for our meetings and agendas posted on our website, and we will continue to do the same as we've done for our quarterly board meetings. The 3 subcommittees looked at the DCYF draft strategic plan over the last couple of months and did come for a response to DCYF that was shared with the full board. That's also featured on our website. You can find it on our front page, I believe, as well as under our documents tab. That was sent to DCYF leadership. Secretary Ross Hunter has reviewed it, and he says he's going to take some time to process it, but would like to come back to the board and address the board about what's included in that feedback. He's just requested to do so after session, which might be here in the near future, but that's definitely something we'll make sure we have that engagement with Secretary Hunter moving forward. And an update on that strategic plan, originally the final draft was going to be posted at the beginning of April. I heard yesterday that the goal is now the end of April, so that's something we'll watch out for as well for the agency's 5-year strategic plan. And then from a board perspective, the child care facility internal review process, we will hear more about that from our Early Childhood Development Outcomes Subcommittee, but we are still recruiting for any child care providers who are interested in serving on that panel. We have more information on our website, but again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later in the agenda. So with that, I'm going to do a quick roll call for our board members to make sure we know who is here, alphabetical order. So if you could just unmute yourself and let me know you're present. Katie Byron. I just got an email from her saying she will not be able to attend, so she's not present. Annie Blackledge. Justice Bobby Bridge. I know she's out of town, so she might not be able to attend. Senator Darnielle.
Senator Warnick said she wouldn't be here because they're on the floor debating a bill, so I'm sure that's where Senator Darnielle is too.
Okay. Sydney Forrester. Lonnie Greniger is not going to be present. Ben DeHaan. Slim pickings today. Ruth Kagi.
Here.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
Annie Lee is also out of town. Diane Levy.
I'm here.
Hi, Diane. Charles Loeffler. Lois Martin. Shonda Slevenoff.
Sorry, Krista, I'm present. I had
Hi,
to
Shonda. Okay,
unmute.
Lois, excuse me.
Apologize.
No worries. Hi.
And I too am here, Krista. This is Shonda.
Thank you. Representative Tana Sen.
Here.
Senator Warnick, okay, is not coming. And then Assistant AG Stacia Holler, are you on the call in case?
I am here.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to request a motion for consideration of the approval of the minutes before we hand it over to the co-chairs.
I'll move to approve. This is Diane Levy.
Thank you, Diane.
I'll second.
Thank you, Shonda. Is there any discussion? No discussion?
Krista, I do. I think it says the full board will meet monthly while newly created subcommittees will meet quarterly.
Oh, okay.
I think we did that backwards. That's in the DCYF Oversight Board proposed 2021 framework. It's the second paragraph.
You're right. We do have that backwards and we've not been following that. We will make that amendment. Thank you. See, Charles. Charles, are you present? I just saw you jump on. Just want to make sure I record that in attendance.
Yes, I am present. Sorry for
That's
being
okay.
a little late.
Thank you. Hi, Charles. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes with the amendment that Representative Dent has identified, please say aye.
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 All not in approval, say nay. All right, minutes are passed. Thank you. And with that, I am happy to hand it over to Shonda and Representative Dent for opening remarks for today's meeting.
Well, good evening, afternoon. That 5 o'clock area always kind of perplexes me. So welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces once again coming together. I want to thank our legislators that are here today. I know that you guys are working extremely hard and towards the end of your session, and I appreciate your presence here today. My remarks are extremely brief. I'm just excited to see all the folks. It's obvious that it's sunny outside, so it's really, really difficult to kind of come inside and work. But I know that we all have very we're prioritizing our children's needs and families' needs and coming together to really try to shape a system that really supports families and children in a way that it has never done before. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and learning from those that have come to share their wisdom with us, and appreciate your time, particularly the public that's come here today to share with us. And I'll turn it over to Representative Dent.
Thank you, Sharonda. I appreciate your comment. I have a question first for Krista. Do we have a quorum? You're muted, Krista.
Thank you.
I was trying to count as well.
I just counted that up. We have 7 members present, which is below quorum.
Okay.
Okay.
Stacia, what does that?
I think we can still go through the schedule at the agenda, but I don't think we could vote on anything. That's the way I would read it.
I agree.
Donna or Ruth, could you weigh in on that?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Well, thank you, and it's good to see everybody. It's a pretty nice day in Moses Lake. The wind's been blowing here all week, and it stopped. It just kind of stopped about a half hour ago, and it's like, wow, it's really nice outside now. It'd be nice to be out there enjoying it. So I'm sure many people are, but it's good to see those that are here. I'm kind of excited, a little bit excited about tonight's meeting because we created those subcommittees and looking over some of the information that they sat down and talked about and put together. I'm excited to hear about it. I think maybe we're onto something here, and and maybe a little more engagement from the board, which I think is a good thing to do as well. So I too don't have much to say other than I'm still mad at Ruth Kagi because she left the legislature. I don't know if I'll ever get over that or not, but Tana's been kind of keeping me in line as much as she can. She comes after me with her whip once in a while and straightens me out. But anyway, it is an honor to be there. It's an honor to be on this board and to be one of the co-chairs. I do appreciate that. And I think about what we did often, Representative Kagi, on putting the DCYF together and how we created that. So I appreciate that. So with that, let's move on.
All right, and the first agenda item actually is from a subcommittee that we don't currently have any subcommittee members present for, two are out of town. But I'm happy to walk through the briefing materials that the board has received. And if there are any questions, follow up, we can definitely take that back to the subcommittee. So the first subcommittee was the Youth and Young Adult Outcomes and Transition Subcommittee. Each board member did receive a fact sheet. I am happy, I realize we didn't prepare to have those up on our screen, but I'm happy to share that. So let me pull that up for everyone to view before, so we can walk through it together. Okay. Oh, of course, because I'm not. We have a very interesting situation in which if we're not on our shared drive for the state government, we can't access our documents. Let me see if I can pull it up from my email if I'm not connected, and if not, we might have Nick, if Nick can pull them up if he joins back on the shared network by chance. Bear with me just 1 second. Okay, here we go. I got it. Okay. So for the members from the public and stakeholders, these are fact sheets that just summarize the work that each subcommittee has done over the last 2 months. So we have here the breakouts of those areas. And for the other subcommittees, the idea today to walk through these will just be go section by section, and I'll ask if any of the subcommittee members want to speak to a specific section and walk through it. And if not, I will do the briefing as needed or as necessary. So it's kind of a little bit of an organic process, but we'll see how this flows. So for the Youth and Young Adult Outcomes and Transition Subcommittee, the members for this are Annie Blackledge, Annie Lee, and Justice Bobby Bridge. The two main areas of focus, technically three for this group, were to review the strategic plan draft that DCYF has, particularly their goal area focused on successful transitions to adulthood. We have a hyperlink here that takes us again to that board official response to the department about the entire strategic plan, and that includes highlights from each of the subcommittee areas. But here we have some of the highlights from this particular subcommittee included commending DCYF's commitment to being an anti-racist organization, but really called out for more specificity and clear commitments on what that means. There's a lot more expectation of integration across the adolescent space, particularly across JR and the child welfare space for adolescents, both in the scope of work, but also in the measures that they plan to hold themselves accountable to for their own performance. A recommendation to make all measures of these outcomes out to your age 25 to be in parity with the JR to 25. And then looking more at diversion and disposition alternatives for youth as driver indicators for outcomes for youth that are transitioning to adulthood. So if more youth are in diversion and disposition alternative options, they're less likely to be further involvement in the system. And you can find more detail through that hyperlink on that response.
Hey, Krista.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had a question about the strategic plan review that we've all been doing that I think might be pertinent as we sort of go through this discussion. So you mentioned that we've submitted it and that Ross Hunter is taking a look at it right now. And that he doesn't think he can do it until after the end of session. And the report is coming out at the end of April. So I'm just trying to figure out how our suggestions and our input are going to get incorporated with that timeline.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I know that there is consideration of what's been in there that's pushed back the timeline to the end of April. And I know that they're still doing some other stakeholder outreach as well. That was that was an immediate thought we had to the same extent, is that if they're going to come out with a final draft, but without having the engagement with the board first, I think we can follow up on that, and we can definitely try and do something sooner or get an idea of what that looks like and report that back to the board. I can't give a concrete answer at this moment of what Ross's plans are for how that's integrated, but we can find out and I can report back. I think it's a really good question. And I know some of the work, especially around the measures and the outcomes indicators, the driver indicators, as Dr. Vicky Ibarra had talked to us as well, some of that work is not going to be finalized within the final draft. That's going to be ongoing work, and then there'll be incorporation at the end of this calendar year to have final identification of indicators and measures that they'll be using with that feedback. So that will be ongoing work, but I agree with you as far as a strategy that I believe is expected to be cemented by the end of this month if they stick to that timeline. So we'll find out. So the next area of focus the subcommittee looked at was the Adolescent Programs Unit. So this was a really great opportunity since Oversight Board engaged with this unit last year, about 1 year ago. So it was February 2020. We heard from Director Jess Lewis. And this is a brand new part of the agency. So this is something that's really a high expectation of how DCYF can integrate services in the adolescent space by creating its own unit focused on this work. Some highlights for that is that the team has expanded from 2 to 8 staff, and they're currently recruiting for more. So this is a growing team within DCYF. They've adopted an anti-racist approach to that development with their staff and their programs. They're working currently with JR to do integration work, but they're still from the conversation, JR is still very much its own entity, and we'll see more through this briefing that's definitely a takeaway the subcommittee had, is an expectation of a lot more integration with JR than currently is happening. One thing that really stood out to the subcommittee that was presented by Director Jess Lewis was that the investments in DCYF, so financial investments, does not match the fact that 50% of the youth that fall into this category of adolescents is who the department serves. So the department, 50% of the youth they serve are 12 to 24-year-olds, but yet the investments, financial investments, don't reflect that. There's also acknowledgement of the data limitations in the adolescent space. So currently the FamLink, the child welfare only system, the database, and then there's ACT, the juvenile rehabilitation system, are 2 different systems that this new unit's trying to work with, but they need an intermediary system and able to make them speak to each other to do more cross-system type work with the adolescents that are either involved in one or both. But they currently in this division doesn't have an IT budget. Jess Lewis did talk about this really an indicator of agency cultural shift and takes that responsibility very seriously, and has 3 pillars around preventing additional trauma, empowerment to be an anti-racist organization focused on equity, trauma-centered healing, and supportive adult relationships are the 3 pillars that she is building. They are building this unit off of. And then here we've added just a few bullet points that simply are reflections on what the board had asked Jess about last year, so a year ago, and just doing some checkups and follow up on what's happened since then. Obviously, COVID has had a big impact on whether some things happen or not, including some trainings, as well as some development on some website resources, but a lot of that is underway. So any questions from the board about just these highlights from that engagement? And again, we'll talk a little bit more about the subcommittee, what their major takeaways are, and as we move through this briefing. And there's always time later for more questions too. So another engagement we did was another expectation of DCYF, and House Bill 1661 from 2017 is their state agency partnerships, and particularly with making sure implementing, even though it's 2018, but making sure youth are not exiting to homelessness. So we did ask Executive Director Kim Justice of the Office of Homeless Youth to come speak in partnership with Jess about how that work is going, what that state partnership looks like. So together they talked about how they have a joint plan for implementing the Senate Bill 6560 from 2018. And they have a report that has come out that will look at some of the data from that report, because that's really driving this conversation. Although we acknowledge that this is really a point in time report, so it's from 2020. We do have trend data within that report, so we hopefully will continue to track that. There was an acknowledgement that expectations, at least of Senate Bill 6560 in January 2021, the deadline was not met, but they have produced in March what necessary resources are needed to be able to make that happen. And there is a preliminary strategic plan that is hyperlinked here as well, which shows how the two agencies are working together to make that possible. So is there any questions about that part of that engagement with the subcommittee?
Krista, I have a question from before.
Yeah.
I had my hand up. I didn't know if you were calling on hands.
Oh, sorry. I'm bad at tracking.
That's okay.
I will
it's
try
good.
to make sure.
It's good to know. We'll just speak up if people have a question. So just back on the part about the IT needs of the adolescent unit. Interesting that hasn't come up in terms of DCYF request to the legislature. Again, it might have been in their package to ask to the governor and not have made it past the governor's decision making. But I think that is something for us to follow up on, and just want to make a note that, you know, there's lots of IT things that are going on. And so if this is something that can somehow be integrated, that would be important. I know there's a budget proviso that hopefully will make it through to the end of the budget process, that is to have the DCYF work with like outside school-aged and mentoring programs, kind of the Schools at Washington type programs, to figure out how to better coordinate so that there is better communication and there is some email or technology system to communicate with them. And making sure that this is integrated in that, or this is discussed in that, is probably important. So I just want to, maybe saying it out loud for myself not to forget, but I just want to make sure that we close the loop on this too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So to dive in a little bit on the data piece, so there is in the statute that created DCYF expectations about outcomes for reducing the number of youth that would be released to homelessness after care. So this comes from the report that is, I reference it above, and of course, off the top of my head, I think it's the OFM grant study, July 2020, homelessness among youth exiting systems of care in Washington State. So this is excerpted from that. And it does a really good job. Obviously, it includes residential behavioral health, but foster care and criminal justice. And we see some takeaways from this that stood out to the subcommittee included the increase in foster care, the percentage of foster care youth that of all exiters that were homelessness, how much it increased from 3 months after exit to 12 months after exit. So acknowledging that something is happening between 3 months after leaving foster care and to a year later, that is taking up a much larger percentage of the youth in the homeless that are homeless after exit. And then as far as the demographic breakdown, that there's definitely obviously disparities exist. These three different populations from these different systems already have racial and ethnic disparities, but then disparities continue to exist and persist within those youth that do end up homeless as a result of after exit.
So Krista, something maybe just to keep in the back of our mind as we go forward in the next, few months or year or so. We show foster care here that 3 months after exit, 9% are homeless, and a year, the 29%. It'd be interesting to know if the foster care attributed to them going into homelessness because it's maybe possibly severed ties with their families, their birth families, or not. Just something to think about, and maybe what we're doing wrong there. I would hope that if we bring kids into foster care, that their outcomes would be good enough to where we wouldn't see it. I'd like to see, practically 0% there. I'd really like to see 0%. But anyway, just something to think about as we go forward.
Yeah, that's great.
Did the subcommittee get any insights as to why that there is that jump from 9% to 29%?
I'm
Talking to the Office of Homeless Youth or to DCYF?
Yeah, so Kim Justice did present on this data, and I don't want to do her any injustice. That I remember the conversation, there wasn't an explanation of why. I think it was considered a critical intervention point to look at why that was the case. And I know we talked a little bit about independent living services and those type of programming, to maybe visit again what those are offering these youth, that what's being missed in that space that's resulting in that. So we'll do more follow-up, but that was definitely something they both acknowledged, both Kim Justice and Jess, as an area of concern they wanted to look into. So we can do follow-up with that.
Krista, I don't see this here. This is Lois, but I'm just curious about of the children who are experiencing homelessness. Do they have any indication of how, like, having some type of vocational program, does it make an impact on the outcome of the children being homeless after they leave? Because I know that is something that when the young people came and spoke to us, they had talked about the importance of having programs like that. So I'm just wondering if they're tracking how the young people who have access to that, how they're doing after their leave.
Great question. Okay.
So, or maybe some that are in, oh gosh, maybe someone can help me. I'm trying to think of the college prep program that they have through community colleges. I cannot think of the name of it now. But if any of the foster children were enrolled in those type of programs too.
Running Start.
Running Start. Thank you, Ruth. Running Start.
And I also that makes me all think to look back. We have asked a couple stakeholders to come speak to us that have more expertise in this field too. That I know that we invited Sarah Mack, and I believe a few others might be present, that hopefully we can get their insight as well into what they believe might be going on in these areas. I don't want to put them on the spot, but that's a great resource we can tap into here, hopefully. Thank you, Lois. I think it's a great suggestion. I wrote that down.
And Krista, one more thing to think about. This is Tom again. We're foster care in that lower chart there, where there's more females are homeless than males, and that's very concerning to me there. I would think it would be the opposite. So maybe that'd be something that'd be nice to know what the answer could be there.
Great. Okay. So given all this information in the presentations, this subcommittee kind of are really focused on these as a takeaway. So there was definitely an expressed concern that there's not more integration in the adolescent programs unit space, especially with the JR. So we saw that there's both the strategic plan is structured that way currently, and also the organizational chart, where JR is a separate entity. And so the subcommittee definitely wanted to see some more progress in integrating those services within DCYF, since they believe that was the intent in House Bill 1661. There's also the subcommittee wanted to request a theory of change on integration of services. So really trying to identify where the near-term versus long-terms within integrating adolescent programs and what the expectations are for those outcomes. So identifying data in that space, which we also see here, there's an understanding it's brand new. So data doesn't currently exist. We don't have a baseline data, but really to push to prioritize that. And that gets back again to that, I think that IT concern as well, to make sure that we can start pulling data to get a better understanding of it. So those were really the focus areas that came away from the subcommittee.
I thought about putting on the fan, but I don't think it's plugged in.
Just a reminder to mute if you're calling in or joining us, so we can stay talking on the, so back to the fact sheet. So that's what this subcommittee walked away with, and we definitely want to do follow-up work with that, is integration in the adolescent program space, and also the data that could be available in there. And future topics, so in May and June for the subcommittee meetings, we will be looking at diversion opportunities, disposition alternatives, as well as relationship with juvenile court jurisdictions. There's been a request to engage with Choose 180 in that space, who's from King County, and they do a lot of work working with youth in the juvenile system. And then we'll also be looking at educational outcomes for foster and JR youth, since that is also an expectation in the legislation created DCYF, that there's improved outcomes in the educational outcomes for adolescents in both those. And here you see identification of what measures those will be looking moving forward. So that completes the briefing from this subcommittee. I will stop sharing my screen. As a transition, we have invited, I see Sarah Mack, who's here from Volunteers.
And I'm sorry, but Krista, it seems you're a little low on volume. Does anybody else have a low volume experience with Krista? No, just me? Okay. I'll fix it on my end. Thanks.
So we have invited Sarah Mack from Volunteers for America from Spokane, who is the Managing Director of Foster Youth. And the request was, and again, we're opening it up for Sarah to share with this board, but really reflecting on some of those takeaways from the subcommittee and the areas of focus, but also understanding from Sarah's perspective, how DCYF is performing in these areas that are priority areas, and any recommendations to be made to the board that would be further considered for the board to take a position on in a future meeting, that could also be incorporated into the board's report about how DCYF, consideration for how DCYF might improve performance on some of these outcomes, with some new ideas. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Sarah, unless there's any other board comments or questions. And I think I stole the introduction from you, Shonda, but I apologize for that. And Representative Dent, I just moved right through. I'll make sure you guys can do the introductions next time. My apologies. So welcome, Sarah, and I will hand it over to you to engage with the board.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I would love to talk about some things that we've experienced quite a lot of things in the last few years, and some of the numbers really make sense because there's always improvement that can happen. I'm thinking on a wide scale though, as far as foster parents and recruitment. I think it'd be really good to talk about how can we expand our scope of where we find foster parents, really even looking at the scope of how I know there's a lot of foster parents that we're probably missing, and we don't have a wide range of different race, ethnicities, and I think we really need to look at that and see if we can focus on making a home atmosphere. A lot of our youth have been staying in group homes for many, many years, and so they're leaving group homes not knowing the basic skills that they need. We get a lot of group homes who will not allow youth to even hold a knife, to learn how to cook food, just basic day-to-day stuff. And I mean, independent living can come in and teach, but we only come in once a month, maybe, to go over some basic skills, but the day-to-day activity is really what I think we need to focus on, to make sure that they're getting the day-to-day practice on how to live on their own. A lot of them are leaving, they don't know how to clean, they don't know how to take care of themselves and their hygiene. And we've had youth who will tell us, well, I've asked youth before, are you mandated to clean your rooms? And they were like, well, the boys are mandated, but the girls are not. And so I think we really need to look at that. What are they getting in the homes that is really important, and not just looking at some people are getting the skills, but on a wide range. How are we going to make sure that that foster parents are held accountable, that group homes are held accountable to making sure that they're getting learning how to go shopping, grocery shopping, take them out, take them grocery shopping. We really needed an equitable range of foster parents, and we don't really have that. And so I really think that's really important for what the scope is that we're talking about. Any questions on any of that? I also think we need to bring back the adolescent unit. That was so key. We had a great adolescent unit that was really honed into what do adolescents need. Right now, they're working with babies on up, and we have social workers that don't know the key things that adolescents need when they're leaving. And so they really don't know the resources. They're learning all these resources from baby on up, and it's really hard to hone in on what kind of resources and things that adolescents need when they're trying to learn how to live on their own. We definitely do all the scholarship information, resources, housing. That is a big key piece of what we do, but the resources are very slim. I would love to see our independent youth housing program be able to work with those who are in extended foster care. They have to choose whether they're going to get that stipend or leave foster care and go into independent youth housing. So I think we also need to look at that as a legislation to open up the scope of what's available. Any questions on any of that?
Yeah, I do. There we go. Yeah. Hard to catch that mute button sometimes. Thank you, Sarah. That was very interesting. I appreciate the information. So the last thing you said, we need to open up the scope of our what we're doing here, our learning, our education, instruction. What does that mean? What does that look like to you to open up our scope?
Of housing, or I didn't quite.
I mean, what I'm hearing here is we're having kids in these programs, and they're not prepared for life. So it could be housing, it could be behavior, it could be, obviously we're giving them inputs, whether it's counselors, foster parents, whatever. People are giving them inputs. Hopefully, they're giving them, teaching them about life. I mean, so I'm just curious about what you see as it would be. How we would open up the scope of every one of those issues that you just went through, and you don't have to answer me tonight. You can think about it and send me something, but I'm just kind of curious about how would we do that?
I think we need to hold foster homes and group homes accountable to what they're offering in the home. We do have some foster parents that are great with making sure that their kids are going to school. They're making sure that they're getting their basic needs met. And I mean, we've had homes who will say, well, they can only get food at a certain time and they have their food locked up. Like that could be potentially food insecurity, that they are not allowed to even go in their own home and grab food. And so just learning about nutrition in the home by the foster parents, and not just by independent living, not just by social workers, but as a whole. Like we talk about, it takes a village to raise a child. So I really think that we need to figure out a way to hold foster parents and group homes accountable to making sure that they are, and give them the training, the tools that they need to understand that this is what these adolescents need. They need to learn how to do this in the home. We've had group homes say, well, no, I'm not going to allow my foster child to hold a knife to cook because I feel like that's too dangerous. That they need to, we need to look at that and work on how can we teach group homes and foster homes to offer these tools. Maybe there's other tools that we can give them, not just like a really sharp knife. I don't know, just something kid-friendly, but we're still giving them the opportunities to learn how to grow and become a citizen, to leave foster care and be ready as best as they can. They're still going to be learning how to be in an apartment. It gets lonely. A lot of stuff that we hear is they do get lonely when they're in apartments. And so what our independent youth housing program has done is we've offered roommate solutions. And so that's been a really awesome key, that they get to learn how to be with a roommate on their own without staff always there to monitor. We're there with case management, not 24/7, but still teaching them the tools of how it takes to really live with someone without an adult always present. So that's what I'm talking about as far as how are we going to make that clear in the homes that this is really important? And I really think that we need to look at holding foster parents accountable.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So Sarah, this is Lois Martin. I have a question about the accountability piece for foster parents, or more so group homes, because I'd imagine that they have a contract. And just wondering with the state to be able to provide this care, how impactful would it be to include having some type of living or like just having it in their contracts where these groups are required to include life skills coursework? Do you think that that is something that would make a difference? And then being able to offer this to the young people before they leave? And what do you think, as you hear from them, besides saying that is dangerous, some of their other challenges as to why it's difficult for them to be able to give these young people just basic life skill training?
I think just having them in the kitchen too, working with the group homes or foster parents, like this is how you cook macaroni and cheese, and with the stove, and really they can show them how to do it, and then mold into, let's see what you can do on your own with staff, and showing that progression of this is how you do it, and then progress to this is how you can do it on your own. And if there needs to be staff supervision, that's fine, but I think that there needs to be opportunity so that they can see what kind of temperature needs to be set, what kind of, how do you cook chicken so it's not raw and safe to eat? So
Right. So again, what do you think is the biggest challenge to them doing that, number one? And then number two, how impactful do you think would be if the state were to add a requirement for the, particularly specifically group homes, to have a life skill curriculum that they offer the young people in their care?
I think the challenge is staff turnover and staff not knowing what's okay and what's not okay. Staff turnover is definitely a key. If they're not sure where they're at in the transition, like if a staff leaves the group home and they don't know where the youth is at, and they're still trying to learn what's appropriate and what's not. And I think there's also a fear. I think there needs to be training on not to be scared to show these youth how to do these things, because I think they hear, well, they're violent, they punch holes in the walls, they do all this stuff that might be dangerous, but why don't we shift the perspective and know that, you know, they're struggling, they're going through all this emotion, and how are we going to still give the opportunities without saying, well, they're violent and dangerous? We can shift it to they're learning how to handle these things, and how are we going to talk to young people about how to do certain things, how to regulate emotions, etc. Does that answer? I think it's definitely a shift in how we think about our young people. Instead of they're violent and dangerous, to they're struggling, and how can we be there for them and show them the opportunities.
So do you think it would be impactful to make it a requirement that a life skills curriculum be in part of contracts with various group homes?
Sorry, what was that?
Excuse me, I just want to interject that I think it would be helpful to find out from DCYF if there is an existing requirement. I vaguely recall, and Charles, maybe you you know that there in the contracts, that there's a provision for teaching independent living skills. So I don't know if it's a question of including it in the contract or assuring that the contract is, is being followed.
Sure, and that's something to look at. I was told that there is no accountability on that, but if that's something that is put in the contract, I think that would be something to look at for sure.
We'll definitely do some follow up with that. Charles, did you want to?
I was just going to say, I don't have the contract in front of me, so I can't tell you, but it occurs to me that it would connect back to what Sarah's saying about accountability, and the day-to-day level of accountability would be on the frontline caseworker for the youth, who's going and actually seeing the youth, seeing what the program is offering them, and making that making a more detailed assessment when they're seeing that youth month to month or more often, and then the licensing people from the department as well.
Definitely follow up on that and check with the department and hear about that. I think that's a good point, and whether it's in the contract or if it's just the monitoring and the accountability of that contract itself and how that's being checked in on. So I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you for following up on that, Kristen. Thank you, Sarah, for trying to answer that question. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Board, are there any more questions for Sarah and what she's talked to about in the space? Well, thank you, Sarah. We really appreciate your input. And if you're open to it, we'd love to stay in contact, and we might invite you to come speak more about this to the subcommittee structure so we can dig in a little bit more about some of those recommendations and do some follow-up.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So I believe that is due to it being spring break and some conflict of schedules. I think Sarah is the only one that was scheduled to speak to the board about this topic from this subcommittee. So I am happy to hand it over to one of the co-chairs if you want to hand it then over to Nicholas for public comment.
Thank you. That was a very interesting concept, but I see we're a very interesting presentation. We're ahead of schedule, but hopefully the folks that wanted to public comment will be here, are here now in attendance. So Nicholas, would you like to move us into public comment, please?
Absolutely. So first up, we have, I believe on the phone is Gary Grant. So Gary, if you want to unmute yourself, you are live.
Thank you very much. My name is Gary Grant, and I have concerns about the processes that are used by the department and the lack of communication. The situation that we are in, we are applying for placement of our great-granddaughter. And it's the application, from the best of our knowledge to begin with, was if they had to place her with someone other than her parents, would we be willing to take her? We answered the questions on that to that panel, and we received no information back at all. Now, let me back up for a second. This process started in, I believe it was late November or early December of 2020. We, excuse me, it went before a judge in mid-December. And at that point, even though we were not notified by the department of that proceeding, we were notified by our grandson, the parent of the child, that this was going to take place. So we called in. The information that was given in the report was false. I spoke up. The judge heard and said, "Well, you should have vetted the great grandparents." The department says, "Oh yeah, I guess we should have." Well, we didn't hear anything for a couple weeks. We got papers. We spoke to the original caseworker, and the response from that caseworker was, "Well, I'm not going to be on the case. I'll pass this information on to the next caseworker." Well, we sent in the information, some of the information off the forms on December 30th. We did not receive any response from the department until late January. I believe it was late January. And when we did finally have contact with the caseworker, she wasn't aware that the information was faxed in. She said she couldn't find it. Then when she finally did find it, all the information wasn't there. And then we played, I call in, I leave a message, no response. But anyway, that's kind of how things were going. Then we get more forms to fill out, background checks, financial, medical, and all this, and we filled out most of them. Now, I have an issue giving out personal information that can be used against me to a group, I don't care who it is, because of the insecurity of how people treat your information. And in one of the forms, you actually have to give the department permission to share your information, and they don't say with who. So that became an issue, and then we get more contact from a different department other than the original, like the Department of Licensing, that division. They're sending us papers saying you have to fill out these papers and they have to be in by such and such a date. Now, I neglected to state that in November, when we first were questioned about this, I asked for documentation pertaining to processes and procedures on how this department works. We were told we would be given that information. At least 4 times, in talking to different people, I asked for that information and told them we did not receive it. The response that we got back was, 1, if you don't want to do this, we have somebody else to do it. 2, if you're not going to send us this information, we can stop this process now. 3, we're going to do it, just give us time. So what I did, what I had to do, is start calling higher ups. Now, what I ended up having to do was call Ross Hunter's office. The individual I spoke to in his office, because everybody's busy and you can't talk to Ross, the person I talked to gave me information about this meeting and said, it might be a good idea for you to call them because they're an oversight board and they're supposed to make us adhere to some of the things that we're not doing. She also gave me the phone number to a couple individuals in the chain of command. Now, I called a couple of them, and there were some things that were done as far as communication. Now, today, I received documentation. The heading is State of Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families Licensing Division. I finally got this because of a meeting on 4/13 where I voiced some of these same concerns, and a Crystal Swanda sent this information to me today. Now, mind you, we're in April, and we started this in December. And everything that we have gone through, and I made this complaint, appears that the individuals were trying to make sure, or to kind of encourage us not to want to do this. When I questioned some of the information that they asked for in these forms, they're reporting, and I know this because I listened in on some of the conference calls with the attorneys, we're being portrayed as being combative, non-compliant, and of course, when I brought that up, they're going, well, that's not the take in this meeting. That's not what we're hearing. Well, what people seem to forget is that when someone is applying for something like this, they're already going through a bunch of stuff. You're trying to comply, and every time you do one thing, you get something that says, okay, now do this.
Gary?
You do that, and then I'm sorry?
Gary, yeah, we do have to make some time for some other public comments, but I did want to, we do have an individual that's on this call now that works for the Office of Family and Children Ombuds that would like to get in contact with you about this. Is there a way that we could get some information to contact you to Nicholas to pass that on? And don't feel need to share it here, but if there's a way that we could get that, we will definitely make that connection for you. And I know Representative Dent, you wanted to say something.
I do, sir. Well, sir, I missed your name, sir. This is Representative Dent. I missed your name when you were introduced. Could you give me your name again? Gary?
Gary, G-A-R-Y. Grant, G-R-A-N-T.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you could probably get your contact information to Nicholas, and I would like to have that, and I'd like to visit with you in a little more detail and see if we can't.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for coming and bringing this to our attention, because these are things I don't know that it's how we could necessarily apply blame to anybody, but this is the kind of things we need to know as an oversight board, and how we can help make the system work better for folks like you. So thank you for bringing that to us.
It's my pleasure.
Great, thank you, Gary. So we have next up I had written down was a Representative Graham.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I found out about the meeting, and I was happy just to kind of pop in and get kind of a feel for what this oversight board is all about. And I am looking forward to learning a little bit more as I get the opportunity.
Great, thank you so much. And for this section, we have Bree Oduwole up. So Bree, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to start off by thanking all the workers who supported Bill HB 1227. I appreciate the state's work towards the federal guidelines to reduce the foster care placement by half, and I believe that was a commitment that was long overdue and well worth the hard work everyone put into the bill. Now, I'm speaking on behalf of my family today to represent the families who were harmed by DCYF and the CPS dependency program. The program was built shakily, in my opinion, and fraught with many hazards. Unfortunately, I was one of many parents who dealt with the bloat of the system and how unfairly we were treated. For one, I wanted to make a stance that the end harm line is a poor approach for parents in the dependency to handle concerns. The end harm line was a dead end line for my family when my son was brought to me in a visitation with half his eye bloodshot red with no white to it. I received no explanation, no doctor's note, nor even just a simple "he was checked out the office" by anyone. I was given a phone number, and that was the phone number that I called, which led me to a person who stated since she was unaware of where my son was located, no one was going to check in on him, and he wasn't. My caseworker gave a lackluster approach, and she didn't do anything about it either. When I did attend my visits, I was a woman who, I'm not going to name her, but she took no effort in coming between me and my son when we played on the playground. She was unyielding, threatening, even talked down to me on several occasions when she could, in the public eye, when she got close to me in earshot, up in my face. At my parenting classes, I found that I wasn't the only parent who had her, and on multiple occasions, many other parents professed to me the abusive behavior that she had relented upon them, and also me. Visitation supervisors should be held liable to an accountability, they should be held to a level of accountability that requires them to ethically treat parents as impartial, not as a threat to the family's reunification. This very same person was the same woman who on another occasion was on a phone call with another visitation supervisor during one of my visits with my son, where she openly badmouthed another parent's mother in front of me. DCYF may have reunification efforts, but the caseworker and the visitation supervisor I had lackluster work ethic, which is sad. I believe DCYF should change how they handle these situations, and no one should be subject to that sort of abuse, which can lead to parental alienation by the court, because her reports on me were damaging in court, and it took 2 other visitation supervisors to turn that around. And CPS and DCYF had no desire to allow my family to reunite based on their own biases. The worst part of all wasn't even detailed. That's just half of it, and I'll leave that. But my son still details to me the horrible treatment by the DCYF caseworkers and contractors to me on a near daily about what he went through in foster care. He tells me he's glad he came home and that he doesn't have to be sad anymore. DCYF took no stance to individually investigate my family and relied on biased reports from other government workers. And I believe that DCYF should always conduct their own investigation, regardless of what other investigations are given to them. So they might seek out and find these answers on their own instead of relying purely on somebody else's conjecture. And then speaking on the foster care discussion you guys had earlier regarding problems with foster parents teaching life skills in group homes. I don't understand why this isn't a thing, but I used my visitation time to take my son down to a Slovakian benefit society in Tacoma that taught my family a little bit of cooking. I don't understand why we can't give these teens access to a food handler's class to teach them meat temperatures and how to store food and for how long. I don't understand why we don't utilize the technical colleges to teach cooking. If the foster parents aren't willing to do so, I don't think forcing them helps either. I just think it creates more resistance in the system. And I believe even a sisterhood or a brotherhood program for adults connecting with teens would be a lot more helpful than just relying on a foster parent group home, because those teens get that one-on-one time, bonding time with somebody else outside the home that gives them more life skills. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Bree, thank you for your comment and coming and giving that. That wraps up this current section of public comment. We have 2 more. So if you desire, please let me know. Thank you. I'll turn it back over.
I'd like to say to Bree, thank you, Bree, for sharing this information. It's most helpful to hear this. So thank you. Krista, are we ready to move into the next segment?
Yes, we are. Thank you everyone for your public comments. They're incredibly valuable. Our next segment on our agenda is to hear from the Child Safety and Family Wellbeing Subcommittee. So I will pull up that documentation, and we do have members from that subcommittee here. And so I will walk through section by section and just ask if there is anyone from that subcommittee would like to essentially brief the board on that section. So let me share my screen. Okay, and subcommittee members for this subcommittee are Shronda Slivanoff, Ben DeHaan, Charles Loeffler, and Katie Byron. So Katie is not present, but I believe Ben did join. I haven't double checked, but I believe Ben's also on here, Charles and Shronda. So is there anyone from the subcommittee that wants to brief the board on this first kind of recap about what the subcommittee looked at over the last 2 months? And if there's no takers, I'll do it.
I think you're up.
I think I'm up. Okay. So similar to the first subcommittee, this subcommittee looks at DCYF's draft strategic plan with a focus on the safely reduced children out of home care by half. I meant to have safely in there, so I apologize. That's an edit I will make. Similarly, several comments were submitted about the current draft. Some high-level takeaways from that is really asking kind of for some further understanding about this section. So this section does have a very ambitious goal, which is to reduce the rate and/or number of children out of home care by half, where the other priority strategic goal areas do not have a goal. So there's a request to understand that theory of change. So where's half coming up from, and how do we know we can get there? Also wanting to understand a little bit more of the thought process about why the specific strategies in the strategic plan were selected to achieve this goal. So what was the theory of change within those selected priority areas? As well as a comment about the family practice model rework, given the way that it's stated in the strategic plan is rather identified that if there is a more efficient family practice model, that should be prioritized as a strategy instead of being one of many, which is listed currently in the strategic plan. There was also congratulations to the department or recognition about the commitment to be an anti-racist organization, but also a request for a lot more clarity and clear commitments on what that actually intends or what that actually implies. So for the March meeting, we invited Regina McDougall from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, who is the administrator that's doing the whole work to rework the family practice model within DCYF. And she came and presented not only her methodology and strategy, but also invited the board to, and me to facilitate upcoming stakeholder sessions to look at this model. So some takeaways from that conversation were an acknowledgement that there is no current formal practice model within DCYF. There's a lot of different practices in place, and different areas are maintaining similar practices, and other ones are, old or archaic practices are still maybe part of the culture where other ones are not. And so the intent here is to really standardize family engagement across the state and to make it very clear what that engagement would look like. And they also acknowledge it's also very difficult to point out what part of a system doesn't work if there isn't a standard that currently exists. So to do so, they're adopting a new approach, which is called a co-design approach. So the Office of Homeless Youth did this previously, and Regina was actually working there before, so she's quite the expert in this work. And it's really about, as you see, quote, designing with the people, not for the people, and also making sure doing so in systems where power imbalances are weighty, historic, and enduring. And this really is an indicator of culture change for the agency, because we are all very familiar with the ongoing setup of the listening session. So we've heard a lot from stakeholders and people from the public that the agency will come up with a plan and then go take it to ask for feedback. And the intent of the co-design session is to start from the ground up with all our stakeholders, families, people with lived expertise, the workforce, and start that process with them from the beginning. It is going to take about a 3-year process in total to work with all the different groups that are identified in the co-design session. And we do have more materials about what that entire process will look like, and we're happy to share that with the board. We didn't include it here since this is a high-level summary sheet, but it is a new way of doing things And we think it's going to, or the subcommittee seemed rather encouraged by this new approach to working with the various different families and workforce and stakeholders to really rework this family practice model to standardize that family engagement with the agency. And as a last bullet point with this, I was approached to facilitate the stakeholder session. So several of the groups identified included stakeholders. So many people on this call could fall into that stakeholder session invite. And so those are planned for June. And we will be talking, if there are board members that are interested in partaking in this, they're workshop session type approaches to having these conversations about what is the family practice model, what do we want it to be, what should it look like. So there's more information coming out about that, but if there's any board members that are interested in that, please let me know, because we do have to be sensitive to quorum and the Open Public Meetings Act as well when we do certain sessions like that. Are there any questions about this, or do any subcommittee members want to chime in and add anything from what was presented here? All right, hearing none. So the measures reviewed are that this subcommittee looked at. We didn't have a lot of time in our meeting. I don't know if we actually had much time at all in our meeting to review them together, but these are measures that are featured on DCYF agency performance page, but they're also federal reporting measures. So these are well known. There is a much bigger report that does have some of these measures broken down by demographics, so they are much more detailed. There's one thing I would like to suggest to this board, and we will talk about it in the future, but part of our work is to work with the agency to make data publicly available. And I know that their agency performance page, there's possibility, we've talked a little bit about this, but if there's recommendations we would like to make about how that could be organized and what data would be included in there, especially regarding the measures that are in the statute that this oversight board is in charge of assessing the agency's performance on, we'll definitely make those recommendations. So as a quick overview, here we see children entering and exiting out-of-home placements over a time span. We do see that exits are greater than entries. Obviously, 2020 has been a abnormal year, but we did see the change in trend happen a few years before that, where exits were increasing and entries were decreasing. Any particular questions about this measure? Again, these are pretty familiar, so there might be well known. And this also is relating back to the family practice model. So this idea, if there's a new family practice model, would see some changes in some of these measures down the road with that, standardizing that work. So here we have children and youth in out-of-home care. So this is the all over number, and this is something we've heard from DCYF leadership quite a bit, that this has been on a downward trend for the last several years, and we see that reflected here. Again, 2020 is a little bit of an abnormal year, but we definitely see that trending downwards prior to that. And I just wanted to, which is a topic this subcommittee will be looking at in the future, but this does indicate that Washington State is one of the highest kinship care placements rates among states in the nation. And in 2020, 45.7% of all children were placed with kin or relatives.
What was that number again, Krista? 27%?
45.7%.
45, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the reentry into care. So this is when youth exit and then come back within 12-month period. This is, we see a slight increase. So this says it has a data lag. So this is back in 2018 for that 12-month period, obviously, to be incorporated. So we see it in the last two data points kind of hovering around 8.2, but a decrease from 2016, which is previous to DCYF's existence. And there is a federal target here. I have inquired whether or not they intend to adopt that for their own purposes, but they said not necessarily. So there might be other target setting the agency wants to do in this area. And this is really to make sure when children go back that they go back safely and don't return to care. And then finally, I believe this is the last measure that this subcommittee had a chance to review and ask questions about, and this is the reoccurrence of maltreatment. So this is if there is a reabuse or reoccurrence after a founded allegation within 12-month period. And so similarly, this is a federal measure. So there's the green line is the federal target. And we see it kind of hovering around a few percentage points there. Any follow-up questions the board has about any of these measures they want to hear from DCYF in the future on?
Krista, I had a question. So there seems to be a lot of information that's kind of missing that overlays or underlays really these curves. And I wondered if the subcommittee had talked at all about whether there's a way to look at the supportive services that are being offered to families to help them be successful in keeping children out of the system at the same time, instead of looking at just the numbers, but what are we doing to support those families to help them be successful? Did they talk at all about that? Is there a measurement or outcome there?
The subcommittee did not, and again, we didn't really have time in our meetings to go over these in depth. It was more of an offline kind of conversation, but we didn't have any follow-up about that. That's definitely something we can look into. I don't want to misspeak without having briefed further on what the agency has out there. They might have something that aligns with services provided, but we can look into it and make sure we get the right answer for that.
And then Krista, can I just ask, I mean, looking at the source for all of the data there, it's FamLink. It would be great if we could get the data on for 2020 on the recidivism coming back into the system, particularly with COVID and all of the consequence of that. So is there a way for us to gather that too?
I'll follow up on that. I know that there's some data lag usually, and it depends on the reporting period just to get the data and do all the work, but I'll definitely follow up with Vicky Shop and find out what that timeline will look like for sure. Yeah, I think COVID's going to give us some interesting.
Well, there obviously was a big increase in 2018 and we're now in 2021. Did that continue, or, you know, that's a pretty significant increase. So what are we seeing in the last year?
Yeah, we'll get that. Yeah, because there's 2019 and then 2020. So we'll get that. Okay. So the takeaways from this subcommittee were really that reworking the family practice model is both a first step towards system reform. Adopting the co-design approach is an indicator of culture change within the agency, particularly within innovation. And its approach has not been utilized in the child welfare space. That was a question we'd asked Regina. And from what we know, there's no child welfare space across the country that has adopted a co-design approach to their family practice model. So this is a new adventure, quite exciting, and we'll see how it all works out. And then again, just a request for transparency around the decision-making and theory change of reducing the rate of children out of home care by half. So how is that target decided? What are the expectations about the strategies to achieve it? And also, can that be applied across all the other strategic priority areas in the strategic plan beyond this specific focus area? Upcoming subcommittee topics will include kinship caregiver support. So we've already heard a little bit about that, which will be a great conversation to continue. I know there's a lot going on in the legislature in this space as well. And then also foster parent support and recruitment. So again, we've heard about that today as well from some stakeholders. So those will be two areas the subcommittee will be looking into, along with some other measures that you see listed here that are also in that founding legislation for the agency. And several of these, just to point out again, are federal reporting measures, so they're well known, but we'll just make sure we keep tracking them and monitoring to see those trends as we've done today. And if things are trending after a couple of years in the wrong direction, to find out what's going on.
Yeah, Krista, you know, this recurrence of maltreatment is very disturbing. I'm with Ruth there. That's a substantial increase. It would be that would be a topic to dive into a little deeper.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Checking our time. I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. We do have, I want to make sure I hand it over to the co-chairs, fair enough. We do have a few stakeholders we have invited that are on the agenda to come speak about this work. Shonda or Representative Dent, do you want to introduce any of those that are listed on the agenda? Or do you want me to?
I would be more than happy to actually introduce a couple of my peers and friends and, you know, crusaders in this incredible work of working with parents. We have Teresa Defer and Bill Jones, who are just recently voted in as the new co-facilitators of the Washington State PAC. So I'd love to hear from both of them. Looks like Bill, you got your mute on.
And Shonda, what's PAC?
Oh, I'm sorry. Washington State Parent Ally Committee, comprised of parents that have navigated the child welfare system.
Okay, so looking over what we were just looking at. So I've never done this, and I'm want to thank Sharonda for inviting us and all the board members and everything. Part of the reunification piece that is lacking is the background checks of family members. They're very slow to do. And so I'm gonna, I know that Teresa was taking some notes, and so I'm gonna let her go ahead and speak to some of those, and then I will jump back in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Let's start with the piece of removal. That's what really is heavy on my mind is when it comes to the removal piece. You know, when I was first approached by my CPS worker, I was already in so much trauma and abuse and addiction in my life. And, you know, my level of education at that time was barely an 8th grade education. I'm in my 30s. I'm being approached by a social worker who is talking to me in a way I don't understand, nor do I even have the cognitive ability to understand it. She is not approaching me with any kind of trauma training. It was just very, you know, just abrasive, direct. At that time, I was being approached with a safety plan. This needed to happen. I was in denial. I had no idea if I did not have meet the requirements of a safety plan that my children were going to be removed from my care. I had no connection with that in my experience. And I didn't know at that time that there was another half to DCYF, excuse me for not pronouncing it right, to the child welfare system. I only knew that CPS came in and they took your kids, and I was already had a lifetime of shame, belittlement, people pleasing, appeasing, compromising, no self-worth, you know, so much absent and loss of identity in my life. And so I only knew that there was just this another entity coming into my life to help. I didn't know to help, but it was just more hurt and pain that I was going to have to endure. And, you know, 3 months into my case, I didn't jump right in. I ended up homeless, and then ended up, it was one of my requirements, so it was a place for me to stay. At that point, I started to understand the community of services. I was very isolated in my suffering, so I wasn't very informed either on what communities have to offer. And then, you know, as you move into the social worker and you're moving into the community and you're complying with all your services, you know, things start to unfold, and you start to overcome your adversities, and you start to build self-worth, and you start to see a contrast in life. And it's a disservice that the parents are not aware that there's this other half the child welfare system that will bring you, plant the seeds for a better future, and how to overcome adversity and see things differently. And, you know, I commonly hear that, you know, to raise a child, it takes a village. Well, to change an adult's life also takes a village. And that was the first time I was ever introduced to a village. And so through the services and through complying, you know, I started to build a support system and started to understand some positivity and have boundaries. And when it comes to kinship care and foster care, you know, my children were separated. My daughter went with my family. My son went into a foster care. And then he went into a placement where that's a whole different story. And then ended up, because of the foster care parents' choices, he ended up with my family because some medical things happened. But still to this day, you know, because of how it was done, he felt isolated and rejected and has his own pain and trauma that we work on today for that. And so, Bill, would you like to build on that?
Sure, I'd like to just go ahead and piggyback on that. So when I went through my, so my case was back in 2008, and I didn't get engaged right away either. CPS was, in my opinion, a very scary entity. They weren't there to tell you that, you know what, you're gonna, you know, if you do the services and stuff like that. They were the investigative part, and the investigative part was always the part that had all the negative stuff about you. And so, so not getting engaged right away and not doing what I was needing to do, it took me 8 months. So my daughter was removed for neglect, and I own that. I you know, I was a great dad, but I was a terrible parent. And so I needed help, and I needed services, and I needed those types of things. And today I can say that. A lot of trauma in my life growing up, alcoholic father, enabling mother, you know, abuse, sexual abuse, different stuff like that. And so there was a lot of trauma in my life. Today, and I can talk a little bit about the kinship part. So today I have my daughter with me. I've had her since my case closed in May of 2009. In 2014, I had a family member that was involved in CPS, and then involved in CWFS, which is now Children, Youth, and Families. And so I ended up doing what I was trying to do was a third-party custody. I had to go through all the waivers and everything because I had been out of trouble and been doing really well. And I ended up adopting this child. And she's a family member. She's my great niece. And so, so when it comes to the kinship or the foster parent piece, one of the things that I can tell you is that the piece is very invasive for foster parents. And so that because and I understand the piece why it is invasive like that, but I think that it is doing more harm than good when we're trying to get foster parents to help take care of, like my child. My child went through 5 different foster homes. She was 2, you know, and so it was just, you know, those types of things. And so I know that we get to honor and privilege sometimes to do foster parent trainings. As parent allies, we get to go and share our piece to, you know, to help the department figure out different ways to bridge what I call bridge the piece between foster parent and parent. And again, I heard here a little earlier about how some parents are very, or how some children are very angry and upset. Well, they have a right to be. And so I think finding that piece and giving them tools to be able to be successful as they're going through their trauma, because that's what it is. It's trauma. And so the other piece that I just wanted to hit on real quick was that piece about the group homes and stuff like that. It was really interesting to hear that. And that piece, I do firmly believe that if we could get coaches or training or something like that, people that would actually come in and do classes in the group home setting, to be able to come in and teach them how to run, how to do their laundry, how to balance a checkbook, how to budget their money. These are the kinds of things that our youth need because they're not getting it in school. Those are the things that are not happening in our schools right now. And those are the very tools that they need to be successful. And I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Teresa and see if she has anything else that she would like to share.
I don't think so.
Okay, then we can go ahead and take any questions if you need to ask anything.
I just want to say, first, I really appreciate hearing your stories and hearing your voice. And it's just so important to have that voice here at the table. I guess I wanted to ask you, just both of you, if you could pick one thing that might have made a difference at the point where you were entering into the system. I know this is a loaded question, and there's probably a lot you could say. Where do you think, what do you think could have been helpful to put that CPS from being such a punitive entity to being a supportive entity? Where do you see that going? Where could it go?
Teresa, do you want to answer first, or would you like me to go?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so I can almost sum it up in one word: compassion. We're broken. We're broken parents, and because we're broken parents, we now come from broken homes, and now we're breaking our own homes, and there's just no compassion. When they come in and they say, you know what, you don't deserve to have your child, and they put all these negative things in their reports, they don't talk about anything or any type of positive. And so we are torn down right from the gate. So in my opinion, we are digging out of a hole before we even knew we were in the hole. And so I'm really appreciative. I had a really good caseworker, my fourth one. She believed in me, and I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing. But she believed in me, and she had compassion, and that compassion brought me to the table with a different attitude. And so I was able to get into treatment and become very successful. I run the Grace Arbor Parent for Parent program down here and Pacific Counties. I also have the Dads Matter program, and I also run a mom's home where I'm helping moms that are in service getting roofs over their head to be able to reunify with their children. And so, believe it or not, DCYF built a monster, but it's a good monster.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off Bill. Still to this day, it's just I can still picture the rigidity and abrasiveness. And so when I was in such a weak and vulnerable place, and just so my guard was already up. I was already shut down. I was already protecting myself from that already. And so the compassion and the delivery for accountability too. Like, compassion is one thing, but I still had to learn accountability and responsibility and take ownership so I could change. So it's that being able to deliver the message with compassion is really important.
I just want to comment that when I was in the legislature, I remember Shonda coming and testifying many years ago. And it was the first time I had heard a parent talk about the incredible impact of a caseworker who believed in her and believed that she could turn things around. And there's just no question that it is probably the most positive, powerful thing that can happen in casework, when a caseworker is able to connect with a parent like that and give them the belief in themselves. So thank you both for coming to tell your stories.
Yeah, I just want to just throw out there, first of all, I just want to, everyone knows I'm a reunified parent, and certainly I've got my own bias towards parents, but I just want to applaud all the parents that have come here today and really shared their story. What I'm struck by is the commonality of the dehumanization of the way we interact with parents. And when we look at the culture shift that we're talking about and this co-design that the Family Wellbeing Committee talked about also, is it's really about bringing who we are to the table without these preconceived assumptions that that we're just bad people. I want to just throw something out there, Bill. We are not broken. Broken makes you feel like you have to be fixed. We are wounded. And what heals a wounded person is compassion. And so the more that we're able to connect to who people are, and not that they're just terrible people. Everybody has a story. We must be interested in hearing their story, and our job together is to walk along one another in healing and being supportive and empowering people to be their best self. And so once again, I just want to thank the parents for coming here, for the constant reminder of who we are, what we desire, and what we desire is what you do, which is just to be with our children and to be our best selves. So I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity, and I want to encourage all of you guys that as we look at that family practice model, that we look at the co-creators, and that you hopefully will be willing to come and at some point, later point, sit at the table and start to co-design what it looks like to actually engage with a parent in a place that empowers them and supports them to be their best. Because when we do that, they bring that to their children. And if we're truly serving children, then we have to serve their parents.
And I'd like to take a moment here to thank both of you for coming and sharing the story. And you shared your heart, and that is everything. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for what you're now trying to accomplish and how you've changed your lives and moving ahead. It takes a lot to do that, and it's something to be proud of. So, and I thank you for that as well. And I'd like to, while I'm babbling here, I'd like to welcome Senator Darnell to the meeting. Good to see you again.
So does anyone else have any other questions for Teresa or Bill? we are a little ahead of schedule, so if they're willing to answer any more questions, we want to provide that time. And I know we've also...
Sure. I could ask another question. I could always ask a question. Earlier when we had Sarah Mack here, and I kind of I pressed her a little bit on what solutions would look like. Let me see. How to open up the scope of the programs and things like that. So just something to think about. I don't really know if I even want an answer tonight, but the next time I have a chance to visit with you, maybe we could sit down and visit about what the future could look like and how we could make some in-depth changes to the programs we deal with, basically working with the caseworkers and such. I mean, I was a former foster parent, and even on the foster parent side, I did not enjoy the caseworkers. And the reason that we're no longer foster parents was because of the caseworkers. So it's something that maybe we could visit about in the future sometime. Just think about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
And speaking of foster parents, we did invite Mike Canefield to come and speak to the board as well about this area of focus. And I'm not sure if he is present. Mike, are you here on the call by chance? I don't think he's here right now. We can always keep an eye out too, and we can just adjust the schedule a little bit. And if he does jump on, we can make sure that we have time for that. Given that we are ahead of schedule, so I'm going to ask, we have another public comment period scheduled. We're ahead of schedule. Nicholas, do you know if anyone that signed up for that is here and available to talk?
Yes, I believe they are both here. So, so moving to public comment, I will open to the first person, which we have Renee Hart on. So Renee, please feel free to unmute yourself. I know we're a bit early, so hopefully this works with you.
It does. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the work that you've done on Bill HB 1227. I appreciate your commitment to reducing in half the number of children placed in foster care. Question, can you see me? Am I up? Nicholas?
No, your video is not currently being shared.
Can you share it? Sorry, folks. Appreciate it.
I'm gonna hit a thing that should ask you to start. We'll see if
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Perfect. Now we see you.
Great. I'm speaking to you today in the hopes that going forward, you take into consideration what I'm about to share with you. It is my dream that no other family go through what my family has been through. While the changes you've made is progress, they still don't address the fundamental and systemic problems underlying DCYF. Because as long as we allow DCYF to operate under the broad definition of good faith and qualified immunity, we allow them to operate under their own personal biases while knowing they are protected. My daughter was sick for 2 months, and for 429 days, she was taken from our home. My name is Renee Hart. It was the winter of 2018 when my healthy, happy, 4-H loving 13-year-old daughter experienced sudden onset excruciating pain. Pain so debilitating that she lay awake screaming night after night for 45 days. For those 2 months, I sought to get her medical help. It wasn't an easy road. She was told it was only emotional, then she was told it was overweight, she was given one diagnosis, and then she was diagnosed with something else. As her mother, I knew something was wrong. In that February, DCYF received an anonymous third-party report from a supposed psychologist. He reported I was taking my daughter to too many medical appointments. Not one of the doctors who treated my daughter during those 2 months reported any concerns. This was a third-party anonymous report. I invited the investigator into our home, and both my daughter and I individually explained what was transpiring with her health. When the investigator submitted her findings, her supervisor, without the guidance of a medical professional, inputted my information, noting he believed I had Munchausen by proxy. Because I am an older, educated, single mom who homeschooled my adopted Hispanic child, I was profiled. From that moment on, forensic evidence clearly shows that the investigator and medical consultants, Dr. Koblenz and Dr. Woods, sought to prove that I was guilty of medical child abuse. They built their case on personal bias and conjecture, fabricating evidence while ignoring the written medical records. Then 8 months after the investigation began, based on the safety threats outlined by the investigator, the police and 2 DCYF agents showed up at our home to take my daughter away. Months later, at her deposition, the same investigator, months later, after her deposition, the same investigator recounted those very safety threats that took my daughter from her home. The forensic evidence shows that not one of the allegations against me exist in my daughter's medical records. And in spite of going through 2 extensive psychological examinations showing that I had no parenting issues and no mental health issues, it was the investigator and medical consultants' professional opinions based on confirmation bias and falsifications that convinced the judge at her shelter hearing my daughter was not coming home. Neither Dr. Woods nor Dr. Koblenz ever spoke with me. In fact, other than the initial investigation, no one from DCYF ever spoke to me or my daughter regarding the egregious allegations leveled against me. 429 days, that's how long she was gone. It wasn't until my daughter was returned home that I felt safe enough to send my case to OFCO for review. They noted the repeated violations and misconduct by DCYF in a report sent to the governor. A report I am not allowed to see, a report that should have closed my case before my daughter was removed. before this travesty began. To date, I have spent over $150,000 in attorney fees and in gathering forensic evidence documenting their misconduct. And despite the preponderance of evidence, and despite a phone call from OFCO to the Assistant Attorney General asking him to please review my case, they still refuse to dismiss my case, insisting in 3 weeks that I go to court yet again to try to have this miscarriage of justice overturned. To protect our children, we need to start by protecting our parents. To protect our children, we need to start by protecting innocent parents, because I am not an anomaly. There are countless others standing behind me, too afraid of reprisal to speak out. All over Washington state, legally fit parents find their parental rights taken away while trying to get medical treatment for their children. This abuse of power has to stop. Innocent families need a process to end our cases before our children are removed. I watched my daughter's childhood be ripped away by the very agency claiming to protect. There must be a process outside of this long, drawn-out, emotionally and financially devastating ordeal. In his article written on March 3rd, 2021, Jay Scheichert wrote, "Qualified immunity will go down in history as one of the court's most egregious and harmful mistakes. We need an independent review away from DCYF, and we need accountability for the gut-wrenching damage that has been inflicted on our families. When my daughter was in kinship care, she was repeatedly told I was mentally ill. She was told by others that DCYF had enough on me to keep her away from me for a long time. Her emotional state became so fragile, her guardian ad litem had her removed to another foster home. Then, against my written objections, my daughter was allowed to be baptized within the foster family's church. For 429 days, the parental alienation never stopped because it is built into this system like the air that we breathe. In the first months that she was taken, my daughter said to me this about DCYF: "Mama, they've taught me not to feel, they've taught me not to trust, and they've taught me how to lie." 2 months she was ill, and 429 days she was gone. Our nightmare isn't over, and it is a nightmare that never should have begun. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Renee, for that, for the courage to share your story. I sincerely appreciate that. It's touched me out. I'm gonna have to think about this for a while. I don't know what else to say, but thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Renee. So moving on next to our next public comment person, we have Lori Lippold. So Lori, when you are available, please.
Excuse me, Nicholas.
Yeah.
I have a question if I can ask Renee.
Yes.
Renee, I'm Senator Darnell.
Hello, Senator.
Hello. I'm so sorry to hear your story. Can you update us on your situation with your daughter today? Were you reunited, and how is her health today?
My daughter is a shadow of who she was. She is completely and utterly broken, without a doubt. She was the happiest, most loving. She was so loved. And the intensity that Bree talked about, the parental alienation and how it's webbed into this process, the damage. My daughter was given more rights, treated more as my parent, and than I was. You know, I wasn't allowed to even be her parent. We're good. I have a good relationship with her, but the damage to my family is profound. I am supposed to go to my next hearing to try to get this unfounded, but from what I've seen in the courts, I don't know why I even bother. There's just no fairness in the system.
So what court do you go to? Is it a superior court?
Is this, no, this is
hearing?
I think this is the CAPTA. Is that right? CAPTA, am I calling it the right thing? I think that's what it is. Yes. Yes. It just goes on and on. It's been over 3 years now.
Well, I'm sorry you feel so alone, and certainly we can see your the damage, that you talk about is real. So
Yeah, it is. It is. And it shouldn't happen. And we need a process for innocent families because we don't have any protection at all.
I think Renee actually brings up an interesting point, because when you're referring to that hearing that you are going through to work through a founded or unfounded, it's actually, isn't it right with DCYF who actually makes the determination if it's founded or unfounded?
Correct.
That feels like an imbalance there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I would have to agree. The whole system is completely imbalanced.
Hmm.
And I am available to speak to anybody because I am truly interested in seeing this change. My case is so clear and the injustice is so clear. There's not a lot of ambiguity.
your daughter is how old now?
My daughter's now 16.
Mm-hmm.
She left when she left when she was 12 and returned home at 15.
Renee, I think we have your email since you reached out to Nicholas, so we'll be happy to share that with any board members if there's any additional follow-up, if that works for you.
It does. Thank you.
Great.
Renee, I might have you talk to Senator Warnick. Wasn't able to join us tonight, but I'm sure she'd be interested in listening to your story. I may have her reach out to you, and you could just she's coming on the board new, and so I think this would be good for her to learn about these things. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Renee. Up next, I would call Megan Carter. Megan Carter, please unmute or unvideo. Place yourself on mute.
Yep, I am here. All right, I had not prepared to speak tonight, but I heard Renee's comment and just wanted to follow up with her because we do have a similar story. My daughter was also taken in 2018 for 427 days with an allegation of medical child abuse as well. Our case has been covered quite a bit by King 5 News and NBC News. The judge finally at fact finding tossed out the whole case and wrote up 26 pages of how DCYF didn't do their job, and also Dr. Elizabeth Woods had failed her job and had just not told the truth the entire time during our case. But what we found so concerning is that there was no option for us to speak the truth during the case. We had to wait until fact finding before we could even present the facts, into evidence. We had no opportunity before that to really do anything. The DCYF just simply acted on the words of Dr. Elizabeth Woods and all of her false statements. And so even though we had just reams and reams of medical records proving that those allegations were just explicitly false, it didn't matter until we finally got in front of a judge and we had an 18-day trial where we called experts and put all the medical records right in front of them, and DCYF's case fell completely apart. But up until that point, my kids were separated from me. My older son, who there were no allegations against, and my younger daughter. My daughter was born at 24 weeks, weighing less than a pound, and she had medical issues as a result of that. She received great care up until the point where Dr. Woods got involved. And unfortunately, Dr. Woods has done this to hundreds and hundreds of families. She's now been removed from her position at Mary Bridge Children's Hospital. But that, doesn't give us back everything that we've lost. My kids came home the day that this was dismissed. There was no action after that, but, we can't put back the pieces together completely again. We'll never get the time back that I lost with my kids. And they'll never be the same after this experience. And it was just incredibly frustrating because nobody wanted to hear the truth during the case. And then when it was over, everybody just walked away like it never happened. And there's very little recourse for parents in these situations. And so I just wanted to put that out there and share our story with you as well, and just back up Renee. It's been a horrible experience, and I'm stronger because of it, but I certainly wish my kids never had to go through this.
Thank you, Megan, for sharing your story as well.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Next for public comment, I'd like to call Lori Lippold.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Lippold, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you and am incredibly moved by and appreciative of the testimony that you've heard from the parents and others tonight. A lot to take in, and I think certainly with the conversations going on around culture change and the new practice model, how we can institute policies and practices that address situations like this very differently is a big challenge, a lot to try to navigate, I'm sure, as an oversight board and as the agency and as advocates and others. So I'm always a broken record when I come and present before you, because I believe that one of the things that the Oversight Board has oversight over are pieces of legislation that have passed. And so many things like the situations that you all and we all are hearing about tonight often have led to legislative action, and with the intent of having things be different. And then you have to wonder, is what's different as a result? So for me, thinking about the structure with the subcommittees and thinking about even just what's happening this legislative session, it seems that it would be appropriate to identify some of the bills that fall into the three areas of your subcommittees to monitor for implementation. And whether it's 1227, the keeping families together, or I was thinking the parent-child visitation, it's clear what needs to happen. And so how do we ensure that it does happen? Because having it happen would change the culture of how families are treated when they are involved in the child welfare system. So I guess I often view it as more, what are the specific things that can be happening that lead to the culture change everybody wants? And how do we ensure that those good practices, many of which are in place here and there, become more consistent? I think about the Family Connections program, the Parents for Parents, other efforts, the Mockingbird family model, that really would, if they were done statewide with consistency, et cetera, funding and all, would change the culture. So, and that's where I kind of get hung up in what exactly is a practice model, if it's not what kind of practice do we want to engage in? What are the policies we want to be enforcing? So I just hope that as the legislative session is coming to an end, thanks to the legislators who are on for the fabulous work you've been doing, and everybody else for all the work you all have been doing, and that there are some really exciting things that are passing, and hopefully, because they are so relevant to the work of the Oversight Board and the subcommittees, that there's a way to actually oversee and make sure that they're being implemented. And thanks again.
Thank you, Lori, and what a great idea. The oversight on legislation that is passed. That's an outstanding idea. Thank you for that. And As always, I appreciate all of your comments.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Laurie. And I'd like to invite Bree Oduwole up for a second public comment.
So I do want to back up Renee, because Renee is not the only parent who actually was reviewed by Dr. Woods. Dr. Woods actually never did anything to look at my son in person. I just wanted to make that clear. And on top of not making any kind of physical connection with my son, she egregiously accused my family wrongfully of strangulation over a rash that my son reoccurringly has because we have eczema in my family. So I do think that it's very important that we do understand that the people who have a position of power in regards to our families' lives should have a lot more care and compassion with the way that they treat not just only us, but also our children. Because in my case, when I went through my FGDM, when I told the caseworkers about the diet restrictions that I had with my family, because I wanted to make sure that my son didn't have any issues stemming from his infancy, which I had already gone through with his first pediatrician about him throwing up milk at an early age, I was mocked by DCYF repeatedly. I may have my son back now. Hi. I may have my son back now, but that doesn't mean that the things that DCYF didn't hurt my family. My husband and I still have a very large problem where we are not sure who all to trust, because DCYF wasn't exactly transparent with us, even though we were also very forward with DCYF regarding taking any parenting classes to get our child back. They were very delayed on getting classes up. My husband didn't see my son for 6 months. That's what I wanted to let you guys know. And I'm not the only parent that had gone through that. Many other parents are on a waiting list and haven't even started their reunification efforts to get back with their children just because of those waiting lists to even get in the programs that they need to reunify with their kids. And it extends the length of the stay of their children. And we also have to pay child support for that every single month that our kids are in foster care. It's not one per parent. Each parent is individually garnished for child support. Whether you pay for it voluntarily or not doesn't matter. How does that help reunification if we're being charged for child support in the middle of our children being taken away from us by force? It doesn't make any sense. It puts families in a predicament where we're poor. We couldn't even afford a lawyer. And we were living in a travel trailer, no less. We were already on the brink of homelessness. It didn't help. That's all I wanted to comment.
Thank you, Bree. Appreciated. So that currently wraps up this time for public comment. So I will turn it back over to Krista.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you everyone for sharing and contributing to public comment. It's a very robust conversation, more than the Oversight Board I think has had to date. So we definitely appreciate it.
So, Krista, I'd just like to thank Bree, that last comment. You taught me things I didn't know. I appreciate you sharing that. So you've said a lot of great things tonight. Thank you.
And I double checked. I don't think Mike Canfield has joined. And if he has, please, Mike, let us know. And with that, we're going to move on to our final subcommittee report out, which is our Early Childhood Development Outcomes Subcommittee. Our members are Lois Martin, Lonnie Greniger, Ruth Kagi, and Diane Levy. And let me see if I can pull up that fact sheet real quick, and then we will do what we've done with the other subcommittees.
So Krista, while this is Lois, while you're pulling that up, I have a question, and this might actually go to the legislators that are on our oversight board. I was just thinking about, because I know Krista's going to talk a little bit about the internal review panel that we have for providers. And I'm just wondering, and again, not being as familiar with the foster care system, um, from that standpoint, but is there any reason why there couldn't be something similar for foster care for families whose children are taken from them to be able to take their cases in front of a similar panel? I'd imagine it would require legislation and other things, but I'm just curious about is it possible, and is that something that the Oversight Board would consider taking on?
Well, it's my understanding that, we've kind of been pushing that direction since we did this. I think some of it's a possibility it could be done through rule, but I know I still have ongoing conversations myself with Ross Hunter about how we can, give our foster parents and I mean, this whole process needs some kind of review, and I get that. I think we heard early on from Sarah. She talked a lot about accountability, and I think we need accountability. I think all of us have to be held accountable. Every single one of us has to have some accountability in our life, or we'll run amok. And I think I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, Lois, but I've always been interested in something of that nature. So not only to protect our foster parents, but to protect our birth parents and the kids that are there too. We all need to have some kind of hold us accountable in some way or other, because I know when we were foster parents, there was times when we had kids in our home and I really wasn't sure why they were there, because I thought their home life was probably okay. So, and there wasn't any way for us to challenge that either. So I think that's a good point you brought up, and it definitely deserves some discussion.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, I know my parents, I grew up with lots of foster brothers and sisters, and, they fostered to the Casey Family Program. And the whole point of the system was being able to unify parents and their children again, if possible. And, when families don't have any other place to go, and I was thinking about what Bree said about having to pay into a system that, when you really think about it, you're already paying into if you pay taxes. It just seems so punitive to me. And, I think it's something that we as an oversight board can have those conversations with the department about what can be changed and how, and what supports are needed to make sure it happens. Because I think change is always better than having to deal with class action lawsuits.
I understand. Thank you.
All right, so with the Early Childhood Development Outcomes Subcommittee, is there anyone from the subcommittee that wants to, we have quite a bit of content to cover, but anyone want to speak specifically to the strategic plan response, or would you prefer I cover that one?
Krista, I think you're on a roll, but we can chime in if you need us.
Sounds good. Okay, we can do it that way. So as with other subcommittees, the subcommittee looked at the strategic plan for DCYF with a focus on the create a high quality birth to 8 system priority area. There was a lot of focus on the outcome measures in this space, and a lot of that is because the birth to 8 is quite a range of ages and identified outcomes for children that fall within that. So the recommendations look to really include outcome indicators for the birth to 3 space. And there's recommendations in that full response as hyperlinked and available on our website. The subcommittee also had a lot of interest in understanding how not only families understand and measure quality, and for the department to consider that and have conversations about how to adopt that as a measure, but also the importance of having meaningful measures for BIPOC children. And we'll talk about it as a future meeting topic for the subcommittee, but we are going to engage with the National Black Children's Development Institute, their Seattle chapter, I believe, to talk about that. There's some work that's been done in that space. There's also a lot of interest in, I know that DCYF shares this within the B38 space, to ensure that the system is being assessed and how well they serve children and their families, not that the children or families themselves are the ones being assessed, which as currently some of the assessment tools in place are really reflect on, especially the educational ones, reflect on the individual performance and less on the system performance. And there was conversations about school readiness and how we can, and that'll be further discussion in this review and this briefing, but acknowledging that kindergarten readiness and the Walk Kids assessment is the main use for assessing the main outcome that will likely be central to the strategic plan, and that there are limitations, but there are other ways that we can consider school readiness as well. So we'll have further conversation about that. In March, we in the subcommittee heard from Kelly Bohannon, which is the Director of Early Learning Programs at DCYF. And I do want to acknowledge, and Kelly reminded us, which is true, that there is a lot of other members, leadership members in the early learning space at DCYF. So the subcommittee will engage with those as well, and make sure that we have a robust understanding of the landscape. As we all know, or most of us know, this is a very complex landscape. So as you can see in the report, the briefing, this subcommittee heard updates on integrated pre-K and recommendations that are currently being drafted by the department that will be ready for how to accomplish this will be due in September 2021. Transitional pre-K, so 4-year-olds that are identified as quote at risk for school failure can be engaged and enrolled in programs before kindergarten. This is through school districts, so schools are the ones that get the $14,000 per kid. And this is an area that we'll hear about. I invite the subcommittee members to talk about this because I know this is an area of concern about that partnership between school districts and DCYF of how to serve kids best in this opportunity. And then we have the preschool development grant activities, which really grounded in anti-racist systems. And there is the co-design that we talked about for the child welfare space has been adopted in the early learning space. So they were early adopters of the similar methodology. It just as we talked about it with the family practice model, since it's never been utilized in the child welfare space, but the early learning space has utilized that approach as well. And then obviously a lot of conversation and concerns about what's going on with the pandemic and understanding the impacts that are being made by children and families that fall into this specific focus area, including concerns with quality, impact on childcare deserts, and also the emotional toll on families and providers that are trying to navigate during this time. And then lastly, within this particular section was that DCYF has launched a child welfare early learning liaison role in the agency. And this is really, you know, another great attempt and progress made in the integrated services space within what's intended within DCYF. And they have been recruiting for those. And this is hyperlinked to more information about what those roles include. But they also just recently were recruiting for an intake and early learning program manager at headquarters to help coordinate and integrate that work. And as I said, an indicator of integrated services and previously siloed systems. Do any of the subcommittee members want to add any remarks to that section? Reflections?
Well, I think the discussions are reflected in the takeaways that we get when we get further down, but
okay.
Certainly the connection between child welfare and early learning, and the looking at how well our early learning programs are serving children involved with child welfare, thinking that that's one of the indicators we should really be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it will go in the takeaways. We'll have a little bit more of that discussion.
Right.
We'll touch that. And then the internal review process, as Lois had mentioned. So this is, we talked about this last year a little bit, and there is a requirement for the Oversight Board to play a role in the child care facility internal review process through DCYF, which is an appeals process of sorts for a provider that has been issued a violation with their facility. It's non-safety and health standard violation. And this subcommittee did receive, so we've been recruiting since, I believe, gosh, I can't quite remember. It was maybe the end of last year. We started recruiting through our website. There's still the recruitment still open if any childcare providers are interested in serving on this panel. But we did get a group of applicants that the subcommittee then reviewed and discussed and selected a roster. And we have forwarded that to DCYF divisioning or licensing division. So they've received that, they've acknowledged receipt. So they do have those names that if and when an internal review is requested by a provider in this process, that they have the names that the oversight board has provided to select from to be able to staff that panel. The panel is going to be 3 childcare providers from the list the board provided, and then 3 of DCYF licensing staff. So that's underway. We are also really doing an intentional recruitment to get more diverse child care provider pool. So that's why we're continuing to recruit, and we will keep that open, but also have been seeking out some other ways of reaching out to some communities across the state to make sure that that opportunity is out there and information is available if anyone's interested. We also
So do we know if anyone has requested an appeal at this point?
To this point, I believe no one has. That is based and reflected on what Travis shared with us last September, I believe, where he said it hadn't gotten to that level in the process. No one's requested it beyond that level. But I also know that currently Senate Bill 5151 is doing a little bit of a language change with regards to this process, because it's been the FLICA, the Facilities Licensing Compliance Agreement review process for the IRP. And now the legislation that's moving through is changing it to the inspection report. So that's underway. So I know that there's a little, that might be causing a little bit of a buffer, but I'm not sure if any, since we last heard from Travis, if there's been a request. I saw Lois, you went off mute, so I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that.
Yes, I did. I think that probably has to do too with the fact that licensors are not making in-person visits. So
Right.
the things that could possibly, cause a conflict, there's just not happening. And they stopped making in-person visits, I think, what was it, last March?
Mm-hmm.
And so that may end up seeing an uptake as that begins to change, hopefully, as the year goes on.
Yeah, thank you. So that was a lot of the topics covered. We did look at the kindergarten readiness measures and had some discussion around this. This is from the OSPI report card website that tracks a lot of the kindergarten readiness, and it's a great dashboard. They do have a lot of layers that you can sort through. So we pulled a few of those here. For the entire statewide performance, 51.5% of all children entering kindergarten are ready in all 6 domains. So it's actually the highest percentage so far since Walk Kids has been monitored. So that is an improvement. And we see that has kind of been the trajectory. We are aware that there will be no Walk Kids data for 2020. Obviously, that makes sense, but that means there's going to be a gap in data when we're reviewing kindergarten readiness in this area. OSPI's got that right on their website to let people know. And so although there is progress across the state, we do see that disparities continue. So here we have it broken down, disaggregated into different to demographic data. So we see, disparities persist based on race and ethnicity across the state. We also looked at the education outcomes of children and youth experiencing foster care report done by the Education Research Data Center, ERDC. This is from 2019. This looked at Walk Kids assessment by comparing youth in foster care versus non-foster care youth in kindergarten readiness. And you can see that distinction here. So we have foster care, youth in foster care in the light blue, and then in the dark blue, the non-foster care youth. So we can see that foster youth are assessed lower in each of the domains individually, as well as all 6, compared to their counterparts of non-foster youth. This subcommittee, and I'm happy to open it up for discussion too, that really stood out was the social emotional domain, is where the youth in foster care are assessing much lower than their counterparts in non-foster care. I did write out some of the percentage differences, but there's a 21% difference in foster care versus non-foster care in the social emotional domain. And that seems to make sense, but it's definitely a concerning trend. And then the math has always been the lowest for statewide. And I know that DCYF previously, and I think continues to focus and prioritize the math focus for the assessment of WA kids. And then here we have it broken down by each domain of WA kids assessment, as well as by race and ethnicity. So there's much more detail here. Needless to say, disparities upon disparities. So youth and foster care, we saw that there is disproportionality there. And then also we continue to see the same with the demographics as well. So it's a lot of data to consume. And we're happy to answer any questions. And we also have the link to this report is at the top of this metric pages in the sheets that the Oversight Board receives. So you're free to go check out that report. It's well done. I know that this is a one-time report, I believe. So, and maybe I'm wrong. I shouldn't maybe speak ahead of myself. There's definitely interest in this data. It's just only was done at this point in time. So we don't have trend data. So we can't see over the years how this has happened, but there's interest in continuing to try and look at how we can collect that data ongoing. Any comments from the subcommittee about the kindergarten readiness? And we also have our takeaways here, but anything specific about the data that we reviewed?
I think the biggest thing, this is Lois again, for me is still that, you know, looking at the number where it says we had the highest number ready, but yet the racial and ethnic disparities are still there. And just one of the things I know we had talked about is what the department is and what intentionality the department is putting toward the various programs to be able to support providers and helping to reduce those numbers. So that is something I'm looking forward to having more conversations about as we continue on in 2021. And then I know at some point, Krista, you're going to talk a little bit about transitional kindergarten too. And I'd imagine Ruth might have something to chime in on that part. And Diane, since we spent quite a bit of time talking about it.
One of the other things that we talked about in our group that I don't see reflected here was having a measure for birth to 3. And Diane, you talked about that a little bit, that we, and Dr. Avera took that under advisement. And I think the department is looking at that because the development birth to 3 is so critical. What indicators could we look at to see what progress is happening there?
Yeah, that was the, and the other indicator that we talked about, since this is an initiative that's birth to 8. In addition, when we looked at the strategic plan, there wasn't any inclusion of a birth to 3 measure, but the other one that we talked about with Dr. Barr was the what kind of measurement at age 8, and we talked about something like the 3rd grade reading level as an option, and that was still something we were kind of discussing, whether that would not meant to be reflecting individual children and how they're doing and be punitive, but rather is the system really doing what it needs to make all children, including BIPOC children, succeed. So those were a couple of things that we talked about there. The other thing I would just say, and it's one thing I think we brought up with Dr. Ibarra, was the interest. There is some interest in looking at rural versus non-rural, also how that layers out in the WA Kids data, to see if that's another type of disparity that we could look through.
Thank you. Yeah, we did include that, is up in the summary, but yes, thank you for pointing that out. We did capture that.
And I think we also talked about WA Kids data and, you know, with the program too, how we're still trying to figure out a way to connect with providers in the community to find out how their children are faring, because we know we had the connection with ECAP and Head Start, but we also know that a majority of the children are not in those programs. So if we're looking at all children across Washington state, we do need that data, because the DCYF mission statement is not limited to just those children that utilize state funded programs.
Right.
And that was actually in the law that established WAKIDS, that there would be feedback. There would be communication between early learning providers and the K-12 schools about WAKIDS data to try to help providers get kids, more prepared for kindergarten. So I don't know if the issue is not being able to track children or what, but I do think that's something that's in existing law that we should probably ask about.
Yeah. That's great. So as far as the takeaways, so we talked about kindergarten readiness and the data that we just reviewed and some of the takeaways from that. We also talked about the limitations of WAKIDS. Additional methods for assessing school readiness are needed to supplement WAKIDS, especially indicators that are culturally responsive to diverse communities. So don't want to repeat what was just said. And then Ruth, do you want to speak a little bit about the transitional K, or Lois, either one of you? I know that came up, and I know it's a important topic. I just want to make sure that you capture exactly.
Well, I don't know if the board members are familiar with transitional K, but it's several years ago, some school districts realized that within the education reform bill that for K-12, there was room for school districts to have a pre-K program for children who were at risk of not succeeding when they come into kindergarten, to run a pre-K program, but it's generally been, I think, only like starting in February, or it's a part year program for a limited number of children. But that concept has been picked up and is being actively pursued by more and more school districts. They get the basic education allocation, the $14,000 allocation for these programs. So many of them are going ahead and pursuing them, and there are no quality standards for transitional K. We have high quality standards for our state preschool program, and so there are a lot of questions about how can we assure that we're having a consistent, high quality program that's accessible by kids and parents across the state. There's a potential of really fragmenting our system if it's not thoughtfully developed. So I know there are discussions going on between the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and DCYF, but the reality is that school districts have a lot of authority, and OSPI has very little in terms of telling school districts what to do. So it's a big issue that I know both OSPI and DCYF are working on, but I think it's critically important to the future of early learning in this state, because we also need to consider the community-based programs that are operating, pre-K programs, and how, in the great majority of states, school district contract with community providers when there is a state pre-K program. So how community providers and school districts approach this, and whether community is being engaged in the discussions with school districts to assure that the strengths of existing programs are built into whatever, whatever school districts decide to do. So it's a very complex space right now, but the need for a cohesive plan of how we move forward, I think, is becoming more and more apparent.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on what Ruth said, and just thinking about having a system where there's no standards, especially, looking at the disparities we already see with children of color based on the WAKIDS domains, and just the idea of having, quite frankly, looking at how K through 12 has already failed children of color and continues to fail them, and the thought of our children entering these systems at a younger age is terrifying to me. And I just think about, I heard one provider in a meeting say that we work hard, especially providers of color that have the opportunity to help shape these young lives. And we work very hard to have them prepared and to instill them with self-confidence and all these things that they need to be effective citizens. And the idea of having that light in their eyes as parents, take that choice because there's no co-payments and it's free and it's this and it's that. But to see that light dimmed in a system that is not ready for them is just, the thought of it is heartbreaking to me. So I'm hoping that, as we continue to voice the importance of having standards in place, and that it doesn't become just a how many kids can we get into a classroom type system, is really important to the work that we do on the Oversight Board.
Thank you for that, Lois. So for upcoming subcommittee topics in this space, of course, we just heard several. So there's more in addition to what's listed here, and they're all documented. But definitely looking at racial equity and early learning. So again, we'll be talking to the Black Child Development Institute and having engagement with them. Black Children Development Institute. We'll also be looking at the educational outcomes for children experiencing foster care. So continuing the conversation that we started in March about that children, the social emotional domain, and that work that's going on. So we'll continue to look at that. As Ruth pointed out, as well as Lois, that state agency partnership in this space, particularly transitional K, and looking for a cohesive plan. And then further conversations about how the preschool development grant work is going to align and overlay with the agency's strategic plan. So there's so much work going on in this area, definitely an interest in overseeing the coordination of it all to make sure it makes sense and everything's aligned and streamlined. And again, you'll see additional measures that are in the statute that the subcommittee will also be reviewing. So with that is our last subcommittee report out. I know we have, I'll ask Nicholas, we have one more public.
Can I just throw in one thing? This pertains to what Lori Leopold had said during the last public comment period. I think the other thing that we need to think about is what is moving through the legislature that could really also impact our early childhood. And I'm thinking in particular of the Fair Starts for Kids, which should have huge impact if that does actually pass. So I just think that we just need to keep our eye on what's coming through the legislature as well.
Thank you, Diane. It will be huge. It'll make a huge difference and change things pretty fundamentally. And I think in particular as well, how is the department going to be able to communicate about it and get the word out? Because if we're expanding and nobody knows about it, it's not really going to expand. But yes, thank you, Diane, for bringing that up.
And thank you, Representative Sen.
Yes, thank you.
Incredible leadership.
All right, so Nicholas, is there anyone signed up for our third public comment period?
Currently, there is nobody signed up.
Okay. So we're a little bit early. I do want to give time if the board, either subcommittees or board members as a whole, have any other comments or discussion. Since we have the time for it, I definitely want to make space for that. So I'm happy to open it up if there's anything before we turn it to the co-chairs for closing and adjournment, but maybe take a few minutes to see if there's anything else that came up today. Yeah, Senator Darnielle.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. We were still on the floor, but I'm sorry to have missed some of the earlier presentations. With legislation, we're constantly trying to find appropriate strategies that should be taken at the state level versus them being directed by the department. And we want to make sure that we aren't making mountains out of molehills. You know, we're being thoughtful about bringing forward legislation that's got a lot of vetting. And it's, as chair of a committee that deals with some of these topics, you don't want to be in a position where you tell an author of a bill that it hasn't passed that test, in terms of vetting. And so I did want to tell you, I made a promise to an author of a bill this year to bring up an issue here at the Oversight Board so that we could begin to look at any potential need for this topic area to be addressed in the coming year. And I see that on the subcommittee on child safety and family well-being, that there's a topic area for your upcoming meetings to review some of the issues around foster parent support and recruitment. And this particular bill issue did come up into that category. So if I can put that on your radar, I guess, for that subcommittee it could be, a 5-minute discussion about this is obviously needed or this is obviously not needed, but it might inform my decision-making as we move into planning for 2022 about this particular idea. But the question came up about backlogs in making homes open for business. And particularly this had to do with an idea to recruit non-state employees to do the work of reviewing the credentials of potential foster homes as one way to reduce the backlog, especially if it could be done regionally. If we identified that there were insufficient homes in certain regions of the state, for instance. So the question would be whether or not there is a backlog in addressing issues about placement. And secondly, if these placement issues are particularly challenging for kids that have behavioral support needs, and the question of whether or not we are recruiting and placing enough children in stable homes versus congregate care or hotels, and these long stays in hotels and office spaces. And then the third issue had to do with the bifurcation of the child placing agencies and DCYF's placing function, and whether or not the Oversight Board is going to be in a position to evaluate that system and offer any kind of insights or ideas for change in how children are served in those two systems, and whether or not parents are supported differently in those two systems, and providing some sort of an assessment about efficacy and positiveness, I guess, for children in that system. So those are just some things that have come up that I didn't move ahead and hear that bill, but I believe it will be back in 2022, and So I offered as an interim plan to bring the issue to you. And I would be glad to provide the subcommittee with a copy of the bill and a little kind of assessment of my interaction with the prime sponsor on it. If that would be of interest.
Senator, do you have the bill number?
I could find it.
Okay.
Maybe not this minute. It
It'd be
was,
fun.
yeah, I could probably come up with that. Maybe even by the time the meeting's over. So.
I'll just say, of course, all of that's of interest. So we'll look forward to the next subcommittee meeting, walking through all of those areas that you just went through, Senator Darnell.
Okay, anything else from board members?
Yes, Krista, this is Lois. So I was just thinking about our public comment tonight and just in general, just something that maybe the executive team, which I'm assuming the co-chairs and you and Nicholas can kind of talk about, but it would be nice to be able to have some type of public comment feedback loop, to be able to say that XYZ happened after the meeting, even if it's just connecting, whether the individuals, maybe they connected with the legislator or you connected them with someone at the department. But I just think it would be good for us to be able to have that follow-up as opposed to just simply saying thank you. For them sharing their hearts and their issues and what they went through. Just to be able for us to know that it's just not a story that just gets lost in the ether and that something was done and there was follow-up done.
If I could follow up on that, Lois, I appreciate that. I had been taking some notes during those presentations and did find the article on quite easily on the case that Megan brought forward to us and online. And the questions I wrote down were to ask the department what was done in these three cases and how because it sounded to me like there were some commonalities. They all had Dr. Elizabeth Woods in the picture. I don't know if they were all from Tacoma or if that just, she ended up being a consultant on all three cases, and I don't know where they all were from. But I'd like to get a sense from the department about the issue of whether or not a parent whose child is being removed on a medical removal, a medical opinion, that I wonder if there is such a thing as a second opinion that's ever sought. And I wonder if there is, if a child is returned, especially like these three cases seem to be so painful and traumatic and a long time apart. What is the department's strategy in that kind of a situation? I would like some sense that there was an apology or there was an expression of concern or there was some sort of you know, in juvenile justice, we talk about restorative justice. And I wonder if there is anything that we could get some data on about whether or not we care about restorative justice for our own parents in our system. And this could be parents that have had children taken or parents that have, you know, people who've been foster parents and who've been exonerated, if you will, in some way. And I wonder how then that justice happens or if it does. And then you know, I guess this issue of administrative review, whether it's a second medical opinion or, you know, who is seconding a motion like that? You know, who is affirming administratively that that's the decision to be made? I guess these are just points that I don't have knowledge about. You know, you think you learn a lot, you think you know a lot, and then you have a question raised like one of those parents has raised, or all three of the parents raised, and I don't really know the administrative process that happens after a medical opinion like that. And, you know, like they all talked about having other people that had input, but they weren't allowed to speak, or they weren't allowed to give their input in the process. And that's just not something that doesn't sound logical to me or fair. And so I wonder if there's more to be learned about what that process is. I get maybe not just me, but maybe all of us need to know more.
And just to piggyback off of some of that, what I'd also be curious to understand a bit better is just the exposure or bringing Dr. Woods, you know, the way that she's practiced, that she was pretty much malpractice, but the families that were that came into care due to that. My question would be, have all of those children been, you know, brought home? Like, you know, has the department taken that information and done something with that moving forward? So that would also be a question I wondered if we could get answered.
And that's why I made the idea of having, excuse me, Representative Dent, of having some type of a feedback loop when we receive this, just to even update the committee on, you know, what we heard and what the department's doing, at least to let us know. And then it's something I think that could then go, as we take this public comment, could move into our subcommittee work as different issues are also brought up. And I know that we're not, and not to get into the weeds, but if you think about families coming to this oversight board as looking at us as their last resort to try to find some type of support, some type of equitable outcome, that's why they're here. So if we can't do that, go ahead, Representative Dent.
Oh, thank you, Lois. I just want to say that your suggestions and ideas, since Rhonda and Senator Darnell, these are great ideas that I think we really need to take a, you know, an in-depth look at how we can, you know, prevent this kind of these kind of things from happening. And Senator, you mentioned some about, is there any recourse or accountability or recall there, you know, whether you're they've taken your child away, or you're a foster parent and they take your kid away, you know, your foster child, well, as foster parents, they took kids from us for no reason, never gave us a reason. There was no abuse, there was nothing. They just decided to move them without a reason. And they made it real clear, we don't need to tell you why. And I struggled with that. And I will say that was Children's Administration then, it was not DCYF, but it was a struggle. And they say, well, you're not supposed to fall in love with the kids. Well, okay, sure, a foster parent, you become a foster parent because you love kids, you know. And I figured it took about 6 minutes for any kid to steal my heart. That was it. And I was going to love them forever. And that was the big deal. So, you know, those are good questions. I really like what you brought up, Senator. It makes a lot of sense. Maybe we can find some direction there. Thank you.
I will say that that the legislature established the Ombuds Office for the Family and Children's Ombuds in order to be able to have an agency, an outside agency that could investigate individual cases and really make a determination and work with the department to resolve cases where it did not appear that the appropriate decision was being made about a child or a family. So that is the mechanism that was created specifically for the purpose of looking at individual cases. And I do think that it's a tremendous resource for families who are seeking, some appeal or a different set of eyes looking at the issue.
I know we're not in public comment, but you can see Renee is shaking her head. Did you want to offer something there, Renee?
I would. I did send my case to the ombudsman, excuse me. And what I was told is that documentation, I am not even allowed to see. All I got was a letter indicating that the misconduct was noted. But they did break precedents, and they did contact the Assistant Attorney General to try to get them to look at the documentation that I had. It isn't a resource for us. I would love to say it is. I thought it was, but again, it was another dead end. And they were incredibly compassionate. It goes to the governor.
Thank you for that. And I think Lois, getting back to Lois's point too, I think it's just knowing that there's some follow-up, even if it is with some other of our partners and offices that we know that have more of that jurisdiction or authority for some of this, to make sure that everyone knows that there's that follow through. So we'll make sure that that is documented and shared. And with that, we're running up on time, so I'm happy to hand it over to the co-chairs if there's closing remarks and adjournment. I'll hand it over to Shronda and Representative Dent.
I'll just say, I just want to first of all just thank the public for coming and sharing and providing us with so much insight. Your experiences and your voices are what help us to understand, what's happening on the ground. And so I just want to really give you a heartfelt thank you for what you shared today. Of course, to all of the other members or public that came all of the members that are here today, just thank you. I know that, a sunny, even though it's not quite sunny anymore, but coming and spending this time with us, I do feel like we had a really rich conversation and that we learned a lot. And I'm really looking forward to just kind of continuing to support families and children across Washington State. And it feels like we're moving in the right direction. So I appreciate everyone's time and what they brought to the conversation today. And I'll turn it over to Representative Dent.
Thank you, Sharonda. And I too would like to echo Sharonda's words. It's been an incredible meeting with incredible information, incredible heart sharing. It just has touched me a lot. I thank you, all of you, for coming and sharing your hearts. And I hope we can continue a dialogue in this manner and along these lines. And the board members appreciate what you're doing. I know that you're doing this on a volunteer basis, and thank you. I appreciate that. I know what it takes to do these things, and so for you folks, I appreciate that. I'm going to try to reach out and touch every board member between now and our next meeting and talk about some of what we've learned tonight. And I view this as a learning experience, and I want to keep learning. So. And I do want to have in-depth conversations with Senator Darnell on maybe how we can look to the future to make some changes. So, but thank you, everybody. I do appreciate each and every one of you.
When is our next meeting? I should get that on my calendar.
In 3 months.
Yeah.
It should be on your calendar. I believe we sent out, well, actually, Nicholas, did we send them out? Because we are switching to daytime meetings after this one, since the legislature will have.
So did you start out the meeting, Representative Dent, talking about bills that passed the session?
No, I did not.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well,
my brain was a little numb when I got here too. So well, thank you for pointing that out. I'll remember that next time.
Maybe that's something that, Krista, if you have the bandwidth that you can share out with the board, that would be great.
Yeah, we can do
We
that.
had some really, really great bills passed. Of course, it's a little bit disruptive of me that they passed, but they're going through the concurrence process now between the House and the Senate. Pretty likely, though, we got all the bills out of the Senate that came over from the House, and they did okay over there getting the Senate bills out of the House. Not as okay as I wanted it to be, but that's all right. But we do have a lot of really good stuff, both on the well, my gosh, the early learning side, the child welfare side, juvenile rehabilitation stuff. So it's I think it was a pretty remarkable session. And part of it, of course, is the fact that we started to go into the session last fall, the planning, and we were, knee deep in the pandemic and didn't think we had any money. And then not only did the receipts start coming in from our sales tax base, but the federal money started to roll in. And so we are yet to have the final budget right now, but I would say that it will largely be good news, if not great news. And so, another week and a half and we'll have the final answers. And then all of it goes to the governor, of course, for signing. And I feel pretty confident that through the governor's staff, that these policy changes will be well received as well. So pretty exciting session, given the remote format and just about as much change as anybody can stand. We still managed to get some really, really good bills through the process. And of course, we kind of hope that the children's bills are the ones where we'll find the most bipartisan support. And I think that looks like it's remaining true. But anyway, a big session.
Oh, just have a quick point of order question to Krista. I know earlier we voted the minutes in, and I think there was a question about the number of folk we had and if we had a quorum. I'm just curious if we need to redo that vote, or did we have enough people?
We did not, given the count that we did that vote at that time. So we will need to redo it, but I'm assuming that will just be pushed to our next board meeting. So I don't think we have enough of our members still on even now. So
okay.
Yeah, thank you for that though.
Okay.
So it's always been my understanding, we don't have to vote on the minutes. We can just approve them without a vote.
By consent.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is Stacia. Yes, I agree. You can do by consent but you can also do it at the next meeting and it's not going to be an issue yet either way.
Okay.
Thank you, Stacia.
I want to make some value added. Thank you.
You always do. Thank you.
Well, and with that, thank you, everybody. Everyone's held on to the end. Oh, Nicholas, did you have something?
I was just going to say, to confirm, the next meeting is July 15th and has already been sent out to everyone's calendar.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look at the time on that, obviously, and some of the work going on and adjust it as necessary. But otherwise, we'll see everyone soon. And thank you, and great meeting, and have a good night.
Thank you, Krista.
All right. Thank you, Krista. Good night, all.